Okay, councillors, I suppose we should make a start. The broadcast is going. So, I have official words to say first. Well, welcome everybody. Good evening, welcome to the June meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones or electronic device on silent if they have one near them, and those present in the room should face forward, speak directly into their microphones, do not place papers or electronic devices between themselves and their microphones. Please, with remote participants, mute microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and save bandwidth to prevent loss of connection. Members of the council joining us remotely should leave cameras on. Officers only leave cameras on only for the agenda item to which they are speaking. After each item has been presented, I will invite members present in the room to ask questions first. Those members joining us remotely will then be invited to speak, and they should indicate their wish to do so by raising their hand facility. Only those members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee present in the room will be making the decisions, and I can confirm the result verbally for the benefit of those watching on the webcast. So that is that first item on the agenda. Do I have your authorisation to sign the minutes of two meetings? You remember the meeting we had on the Tuesday afternoon, 25th of April, to discuss the work programme, and the 16th of May, or it might be the other way around actually, as correct records of the proceedings.
Happy to move, Chair.
Thank you very much. Apologies and substitutions. I have a couple of apologies. We have apologies from Councillor John Barnes and Councillor Polly Gray, who is got mixed up with the holiday dates on bank holidays. Substitutes are Councillor Mrs Barnes for Councillor John Barnes and Councillor Richard Thomas for Councillor Polly Gray. And join us online are Councillors Cortell, member of this committee now, and Chairman of Council, Councillor Harmer. So welcome to them as well. Additional agenda items, item 3, there are none. Disclosure of interest, I would probably think not a lot, to be honest. Anybody have any disclosure of interest they feel they need to make? No? Okay. Item 5, performance report, 4th quarter. Ben, we'll start.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will find in front of them the 4th quarter for 21-22. So that's obviously the last report for the last financial year. I mean, obviously we've been through the progression throughout the year. I don't think anything that comes up in this report will be particularly of a surprise to members, because actually it doesn't deviate in any way from the three previous performance reports that were presented for the various quarters. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. There's not much point in me sort of taking members through it, but happy to take any specific questions with regards to particular areas that they may wish to.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any questions sort of jumping out? There's a couple that I've sort of thought. One was on waste collection. The recycling has reduced, I won't say substantially, but it's reduced. And I would like to know, so is there a reason for that? I hope people aren't just being lazy. You would like to think that perhaps there's less stuff to recycle to start with. But who knows? Are Amazon sending smaller boxes now so you don't reduce, you don't recycle so many large boxes? I don't know. That would be something I think we would like to, well, I'd like to know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ben?
I'll be honest with you, I don't have the data on me to sort of comment as to whether the overall tonnage of recycling is down. I would say, obviously, in the early stages of the pandemic, we had issues regarding bring sites. I think that's less of an issue now. Obviously, as we've re-engage regular collections. I don't know is the answer. I think I'll have to do a bit of research into whether or not the overall tonnage has come down, and to what extent, and whether or not there's any sort of more complex reasoning behind that. Well, I mean, one would hope that actually, we're seeing people use less, which in itself would result in less recycling if you're only left with your residual waste, and less packaging, less plastic packaging, and so on and so forth. But that's sort of commentary rather than hard fact.
Okay. What have we got? We've got Councillor Mooney first, and Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm other than happy about the results here. I appreciate, as Officer Ben Hook suggests, that it's not so different from last time, but it's hardly a time to sit back and look on. It's quite serious, isn't it? Because we've had, just to take one, we've had lots of help in dealing with the planning, but yet we're behind. So we're paying big money to Capita for not much of a gain. Perhaps we could deal with that first and tell me how it's progressing. I appreciate that water has gone under the bridge since the 31st of March. Maybe you might brighten up my day by telling me things are doing better now. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's. I mean, it is. I mean, where we are at the moment, obviously, is we've had Capita on board since September. We've also had a new interim development manager in since that time. What I do is I do send all members an email every month with the monthly performance, and what you've seen in those statistics is that the overall caseload for planning dropped significantly from about 850 down to just around about 500, where it seems to have sort of stagnated. Now, that's quite a lot more than what we had if you go back 3 years on average. We were sort of had a caseload of around 350 overall. So we are experiencing significantly higher demand through the planning service than we've ever had to deal with. But we are managing to process those now within a reasonable timescale. We are still some way off of the mandatory 8 and 13 weeks, but it's significantly better than it was. What we're reporting here really is the back end of all of those where we suffered the backlog. So as we've processed the backlog, those decisions have been issued, and as the decisions get issued, all that 200 odd days that application sat there doing nothing for a lot of the time is now hit our statistics. So what I'm hoping is that in 6 months' time, once we've flushed all of that backlog out of the reporting, what you'll see is a significant improvement on the overall performance. And it does seem to be, if you sort of take away the outliers, those that were sat there, and submitted sort of middle of last year, where there was, and we've been quite open about the service failures that happened within the planning department, that once those have sort of worked their way through the system, we're going to see a significant drop in these numbers, and we'll see, whilst not quite back to the 8 and 13 weeks, which is, I think, a sort of a longer-term goal, we are going to be much closer to where we should be. I would say that we're not a focus of government intervention at this time, so it's not like MHC, LG, or DLUC as they are now, Department for Housing and Levelling Up. We're not on their radar for failure of performance, and we've been able to demonstrate that we've made significant improvements over the last 9 months. So yes, you will see these drop in the reporting for the 22-23 financial year.
Sorry, you say 6 months. That's quite a long way away, isn't it? I was hoping you would say by the next report we would be that much more going into the black, not the red. So that's a long time.
No, it's a fair point, and I think what we will see is in the Q1 report, you'll see a significant improvement. So the Q1 for 22-23 will not include a lot of those backlog cases, and you'll see a significant improvement in the turnaround time for applications. What we have had in that time, those still unprecedented levels of demand. So that's why we're not going to be where our ambition is, which is still the statutory time limits of 8 and 13 weeks, but we are going to be much closer to them. And you will see a significant improvements in the first quarter reporting and then an even better performance in the second quarter reporting, though it is starting to plateau a little bit, and we'll have to put some more energy into sort of bringing it that extra 15-20% to get it back into line with government expectations.
Forget about there's a microphone here. It's because they've moved me up a couple of spaces, so I'm under an illusion I'm shouting already, maybe I am. It's a bit of a letdown. Additional income generation, zilch. Nothing.
I think I asked the same question at our briefing last week, and Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this was down to the pre-application advice was stopped. So that is an additional income. So pre-application advice has now been restarted. So we do have some income on that now. And I think there's additional income from some units somewhere in Beeching Road that weren't let, but now they are. So there's more additional income. Ben answer that a bit better, I suppose.
Yeah, it's primarily down to the additional income derived through the planning service. So when the net additional income target was set, it was primarily about driving discretionary services through planning. So pre-application processes, planning performance agreements, all of these things were not implemented throughout the last year. We've now we've now reintroduced pre-application advice, and I think we've seen about £34,000 worth of pre-app requests come through so far this financial year, so that's from the 1st of April. We've also introduced planning performance agreements, and that's near £75,000 worth of requests we've had come in. So that's a specific agreement with a developer about a specific planning application that agrees. It doesn't lead to a decision, but what it does do is it guarantees a timescale and resources put against it so that we can deliver against their expectations. And it just means that we're primarily focused on major schemes, schemes with 10 houses or more, or the hospital scheme, for example, in Bexhill has a planning performance agreement in place because obviously it's a major scheme that they need to see through. So that will go up again. Again, that will go up for the quarter one target because we have started to see that income come through the door now.
And finally, we're dragging our feet with providing additional housing for people who are on the streets, people who need housing. And the average people in temporary accommodation is going up. Obviously, you'd expect that to go in line with not enough houses to house people. But is there any movement on that? Is there any light over the horizon here? Are we going to get an improvement in that shortly? Because why should the council of all people who have the strength to buy houses or even provide houses better than the average citizen, why should they be struggling to provide extra housing?
It's a fair question, and I think I want to be clear. The number of households in temporary accommodation is not a reflection of our performance in terms of putting people into accommodation. So we will always be able to put people into accommodation. It's a reflection of need, and the need has increased for a variety of factors, and that will only get worse. I would imagine over the coming years with the cost of living, going up, and people further being unable to afford rent, being made homeless because of that. And so I anticipate, I think you'll probably see that number in terms of households in temporary accommodation going up. I would say we put in a lot of interventions in place, things like the tenant finder scheme, working through social landlords and the social lettings agency that we're running to try and help get private landlords onto the books to take people, and that's therefore moving people through from temporary accommodation into longer term rentals much quicker. But obviously, again, it's a need-led service, and so we just respond to whatever level of need there is. I would say if you look, so what I did is try, given that this is a sort of a reflection on the year, I did ask our data officer to give me the final results for 2019-20, the last pre-pandemic year, and the average household, the average number of households in temporary accommodation there was just under 60. So we were only just about surviving the target. Obviously, we're seeing that number increase, but it's not gone up exponentially. But I think it is a reflection of the need that's out there at the moment, rather than necessarily the performance of being able to get people out of temporary accommodation and into to rentals, which are just, quite frankly, becoming unaffordable in the private market.
Aside from you, page 76 of the audited accounts for 2022. On the 21st of August 2012, the Council entered into an agreement under Section 106 of the Town and County Planning Act 1990 with regard to the Ravenside Retail Park, Bexhill-on-Sea. The agreement resulted in a payment to the Council of £959,000, which was received for the provision and improvement of leisure facilities in Bexhill and the enhancement of shopping facilities in Bexhill Town Centre. The monies have to be expended within 15 years of the date of the agreement, or they will have to be repaid to the property owner plus interest. That is something that we can ill afford. What is your expectation of that happening?
That money is all now allocated. It's all been spent. So primarily, it was allocated towards the improvements of the skate park and BMX track at Sidley. In regards to the town centre improvements and the retail area, that was allocated towards the town centre steering group. What was left of that, there was about £25,000 left of that, and some of that's been used to upgrade refurbish the Devonshire Road, Devonshire Square toilets, as well as a number of other interventions that were agreed by the town centre steering group. That report went to Cabinet, I don't know, some point in 2021, about releasing those funds down to the town centre steering group, and they've done a number of things, including funding things like the part funding the footbridge, allocating some funding towards that, the toilets. There's some funding towards vintage market that's going to go ahead, as well as a number of other things that the money's been requested. But fundamentally, that money's all been spent, so there'll be no chance of us having to pay it back.
And is that this was specifically allocated to providing a leisure centre. What does the donee think about that?
It was specifically allocated towards the improvement of leisure services and leisure facilities, and it was the skate park and BMX track at the Sidley Rec falls within that category. So that's why it was allocated towards that.
That's not what it was given for. It was given specific to provide a leisure centre. And we have the people that are running the leisure centre are contractors. We haven't not running a leisure centre ourselves. So why? And there's a hold up on the land. And why? Is it ever going to happen? Because have you had authorization, shall we say, from the donee that the money you've used so far is in order to be used as you have stated?
I can only assume so. It's not part of my service area. I don't know the history of the authorisations, but yes, I would assume that the proper authorisation process was being followed. I wouldn't imagine it hasn't. In regards to the leisure centre work, there's been a report to obviously Cabinet this year in which they've asked for us to conduct the commissioning of a strategy, a leisure facility strategy. which will be coming back to this committee for first review in September, once we get onto the work programme, which will then obviously then go out to public consultation and then come back through this committee, I think December, off the top of my head, or November, following that consultation for further review by this committee.
Are you done now, Councillor Mooney? Good. Right, I've got a list. Don't need to put your hand up, Councillor Barnes. I've got you written down. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions connected with housing, and so maybe, although my questions aren't directly related, I ought to declare my position as Chair of the Rother District Housing Company Limited. So my questions relate to matters Appendix A, number 10, and it's just questions just to get information, really. The first thing I noticed, it said there were 28 discretionary placements made for rough sleepers during the pandemic, and these placements are funded by external grant, although this may not continue. Do we have any information about whether or not those grants will continue, and what we will do if they don't, please?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid. I think we are expecting that funding to end, and the consequences of that, as you say, will be quite bad. And the rest of the country is dealing with the same thing. But I will find out what the status is of that grant and when it ends, and let the committee know.
Thank you very much for that answer. Then the other thing that I just want to draw attention to was that most of the targets in this report, if they're not met by quite a reasonable margin, by 10 or 20%. So the targets are realistic targets, basically, something to aim for. But the exception is the target for homeless households on the waiting list. Now, whereas we've got 1,915 people on the waiting list, the target is 1,200. So that's a 50% difference. And I see that later on, we're told that the number on the housing register will reduce significantly once the new process of migrating households to the new allocation scheme is completed. Can you give me an idea of how much a difference that's likely to make, and to describe why that's going to make such a difference, please?
Again, I'll have to come back to you on the policy change there, but yeah, I think there's something about the way that we do our target setting in general, and I also think there's something about the way that we report our performance. I think we're not using the amber triangle status, and I think that's something about a threshold, what threshold is kind of acceptable, and that's something that perhaps this committee wants to have a think about. So it's not just meeting the target, it's what is an acceptable level of performance before it dips into an alert, as the way that it's shown in this report. And I think we can probably have more subtlety to the reports. And as much thought about, we need to put as much thought into the target, looking back on past performance, what policy changes we have in train, that will shape, and make sure we're working towards a realistic target going forward. But I think in relation to that one, that there will be action and a different criteria that will be applying to the policy in terms of the waiting list. And I think that's something that will be coming back to members for consideration.
Let's just come back on that very briefly. I think that's a very good point that you made, a set of good points you made, because if there is a consistent relationship between target and achievement, then we've got a consistent pattern of achievement by the council. If there isn't a consistent way of establishing those criteria, we've no way of knowing whether a big gap is because the council is being over-ambitious, because it's performing badly, or what is the reason. So I think there's a great need for what you're talking about, which is to examine the very question of targets and how they relate to outcomes. So thanks for the answer.
I believe that's probably in a corporate plan. But I can see your point on that one, sort of the 1,200 figure. I think it's probably historically, for budgeting reasons, probably as much as anything. But, I can I can think back probably 15 years, and we was probably at 1,400 people on the list 15 years ago. I don't think all the time I've been on the council since 1999, we haven't been probably below 1,200. You might have been around, but I don't know. You know, is that an unrealistic figure? You know, or is it right to sort of just increase your target to suit? Doesn't really look right, does it? If we said, well, put a target at 1,900, we'd all have green boxes everywhere, but it doesn't seem the right way of doing it. So, yeah, difficult one. If you're finished, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Mary Barnes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Bit of a light bulb moment, that moment about the leisure centre. And it really worries me because, Ben, you were reeling off the number of things that that money's been spent on. BMX track, what else was there?
So the substantive money, i.e. the big infrastructure money, went towards the BMX track and the skate park at the Sidley Rec.
That's right. Well, as a member of Rother, and remembering that we wanted to have a large sum of money put aside for the leisure centre for the benefit of the health of the whole of Rother. Now, I am concerned that we are spending the money quite rightly. I mean, Bexhill is the biggest part of Rother. But really, I think, to be fair, we needed to have a sum of money put aside so that we could have a leisure centre that was going to be for the benefit of everybody and was going to be something which we would all look back on and say, this was something that really put Rother on the map, that we were going to have this extraordinary centre, not only for swimming, but also for healthcare generally, for people to come in and have, you know, all sorts of treatments and all the rest of it that would have gone with it. And from the sound of it, that money has pretty nearly gone. Is that right? You mentioned, I think, 25,000.
The substantive money has been spent. Yeah, there's some change left over.
Well, I have to say, I think that's extremely worrying, and I think for Rother's sake, it's incredibly sad because we have deprived the whole of Rother of that facility.
All I can say is that's a sort of a policy argument, and I can only report back on what it was spent on.
And I realise that, but you know, as you were doing it, were you not thinking, well, that money was put aside for Rother, you know, for the benefit of Rother, and we're not doing that.
I think, if I'm honest, I'm not seeing that specific issue on the agenda. I know we're talking about performance targets. So we've gone off performance targets on the spending specific sums of money. So whether, you know, to get the answer to your question this is probably not the place, but full council probably would be, and that might be better off put there than trying to get an answer to saying we don't have the papers or the agenda ultimately to deal with. I wouldn't say. Councillor Mooney, I thought you'd finished, but if you wanted to come back quickly.
So I brought it under additional income. That's how I brought it under additional income. And believe me, we need additional income. If you want to compare a leisure centre operating very well, just look at St Albans. That's what they did some 7 to 8 years ago. Thank you.
Councillor Cook. Well, I've got my list. Well, it doesn't matter because you're not going to be left out, are you? So
something you want to talk about before the time we get to it.
All right. Councillor Mrs. Williams, floor is yours.
I just want to follow on a bit from what Councillor Barnes was saying, in as much as that I can't remember this being discussed as to how that money was going to be dispersed. Was it a cabinet decision and I've missed it? How was it decided? Did it go to, who did it go to?
I honestly don't know at this stage. I'll have to look into that and come back
Could
to
you
you.
find out,
I
please?
don't know.
Because I'd really like to know how
If
the
it were one
decision
of my
was
reports, I'd
made.
be able to tell you like that, but unfortunately...
Because it's quite an
it's
important
outside
decision,
my
isn't it?
remit. Well, it was... Yeah, I'll find out that information and report back.
Okay, thank you. That was just following on from that. But also going right back now to what I originally put my hand up for, which was about the recycling. And I just wanted to say that somebody currently told me themselves, I said about recycling, they said, oh, I never bother, I just stick it all in the black bin. Because they'll take anything in the black bin. And so I was a bit worried about this. And then I started to think, yes, in another area that I know very well, they empty the black bin once a month. And therefore, people have to recycle because otherwise they've got to wait months to get the black bin emptied. And also, I still think we're missing the trick with the food, picking up the food recycling. That is something that I think we really should be looking at.
With regard to food recycling, you probably could be right, but I understand that central government are looking at making it a compulsory service, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, so that is part of the Environment Act, forthcoming Environment Act, to make it a compulsory collection. So if we hold off on doing it voluntarily, then government will pay us to do it. So.
You done? Yeah, okay, right. I'll go to Councillor Clark and get the troublesome out of the way.
We've been very patient, I think.
Oh, thank you very much, Chairman. A couple of quick points. One, on the recycling, I do struggle because we did close some of our recycling collection point centres. They did it in Pembrokeshire, we lost 5 bins. So the theory behind that is then that collection went to the doorstep collection, especially glass bottles and that. So I don't understand that if our reduction is going down, that's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing on housing, because it's my portfolio originally, it's an ever-moving thing when you talk about demand for housing, because don't forget we had a period where there's a moratorium on evicting tenants. The government said you can't. So that's held that back. But once the moratorium is lifted, then the demand and maybe will be an excess in more evictions. And also we have had success with the tenancy finder scheme, which I'm very pleased to see, and that scheme matches tenants with landlords at a reasonable rent. And we had a lot of success with that. So that's been good. And also we are still continuing to buy properties on the market. We do have funds, and we have to a degree underspent on that. But then when we go to a property and want to buy it, sometimes we start the process and it falls through and it doesn't complete. So, but I know we have added additional properties in recent times. But what really worries me now is that with the recent increases in food prices and massive fuel increases, I can see a lot of tenants in the private sector struggling to pay their rent. And there could be a surge in evictions in that sector as well. So the thing's always moving, you know, the circumstances are changing. But I think as a council we're doing as much as we can. I don't think we've got anything to be ashamed of at all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. My main question is around, or point I guess, is around the council tax reduction claimants. And obviously, I guess, in one sense, seeing a green tick against that and seeing that there have been fewer claimants of council tax reduction could be seen as a positive in that, well, perhaps more people have, you know, found jobs or managed to improve their situation. What I fear is the reality might actually be that less people have found our council tax reduction scheme. And obviously I know the anti-poverty strategy, once that comes in, will hopefully help with that and sort of communicating that to residents. But I don't know if we're aware of sort of any particular reasons for that drop in the target, and also can we get rid of the green tick?
So, sorry, you were asking about the council tax support numbers. Yeah, I mean, there could definitely be a case for making sure that we're signposting our residents to these sorts of benefits. And I think, I don't know the answer to why it's actually gone down like that. But, we definitely have a role in making sure that people are aware of what they're entitled to. And the green tick, is that, you mean, oh, right, okay. Oh, I see. Oh, I understand what you mean by, yes, yeah, okay. No, that is not a good message. I understand what you mean now. So yeah, we'll certainly look at that. And again, there's something about making sure we're interpreting these targets correctly and they're actually making sense and what we're monitoring makes sense. So yeah, I take your point, Councillor Coleman.
And if I just might add a little bit about the leisure issue briefly, just as it has been mentioned, I was up in the Sidley BMX and Skate Park this morning for a pre-launch event with some of the cabinet members, and it was very awesome to see. I think it's a very good spending of leisure money on a pretty awesome leisure facility that will have sort of national acclaim to it, I think, by the time that it's open. And members of any part of Rother are welcome to come down with their safety hats and their knee pads and give it a go. I'd happily escort Councillor Barnes around the facility if she wanted to go herself.
I think I'm about 42 years too late for a skateboard. Certainly used to have one. I've got Councillor Maynard. I'll take Councillor Cook and then Councillor Maynard.
Thank you, Chair. Coming back to the performance targets, which is what we're talking about at the moment, I recollect that we put out a call to private landlords who were struggling to find suitable tenants to come alongside of us, didn't we? We were either going to take over their properties, buy them, or we were going to take over the tenancies. And I just wondered how long it takes from the time we take over a tenancy or take on a new property to be able to make that habitable for either homeless people or for temporary accommodation.
Okay, so there are two schemes. One's the tenant finder, which is where we work with private landlords to match them with people who are either already in temporary accommodation or on a housing list waiting to find accommodation. And that's a separate scheme to the temporary accommodation purchasing. Again, the TA purchasing anything between, depending on the state of the property. So there's one property that we're looking at that will provide 12 units, I think it is, which is quite a substantial number, primarily focused at the high end of our need, which is sort of single men. But that needs a full refurbishment of that building, whereas there are others that are ready-made, off the shelf. Here we go. There's a house. Let's get a family into it straight away. So that varies on the temporary accommodation side. In terms of the tenant finder, I'm not sure what the average timescale is. I imagine we'd have to find that information out and come back to you on it.
Thank you. That would be very helpful.
Okay, Councillor Maynard.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I want to just refer to Appendix E, where we talk about planning processing. We see that in major housing development applications, the target is 91 days to process, the fourth quarter result is 141 days, and that minor housing development planning applications, so those that are for extensions and the such like, the target for 2021-22 is 56 days, and the fourth quarter result is a woeful 174 days. There's already been some narrative around the fact that obviously within the report we talk about obviously the increasing number of applications, but certainly in my experience of local ward councillor, one of the problems that I've been faced with is the quality of planning decisions made under delegated powers by agency planning officers that don't reside anywhere near Rother. And I think it's a serious problem. And I do think that whilst we were told it was temporary, we still have agency planning officers, and that, I think it's 4, I'm sure Ben will correct me if that's the incorrect number, and an agency head of development control as well. And what I would like to know is where are we in the process of recruiting planning officers to replace those agency officers and indeed the agency head of development control, because I want to take nothing away, and I do think there is a distinction between them. I want nothing to take nothing away from experienced senior officers at Rother who have worked hard and tirelessly to get major applications through. I mean, I will single out Jeff Pyre, who I think does a superb job. And I think I will mention him by name for that very reason, but there are others, like Sarah Shepherd, there are others within the department that have been with us for a number of years, and we're lucky to retain them. But this problem of agency planning officers, and indeed the problems within the planning service, it doesn't seem as if it is a temporary thing, it seems as if it's endemic. And what I would like to hear is, where are we in terms of recruitment? Thank you.
I think those are some very valid points. In terms of the agency staff, we now have 3 full-time equivalents still on the books. 2 of those are acting as maternity cover. So we did lose 2 of our senior planners. Well, actually, one who was recently promoted to a principal planner role, who are now on maternity. And obviously, so we can't. The whole service operates on a knife edge. If you lose 2 of your senior planners, then that's where you're going to start getting trouble. So we did retain 2 of the agency workers. And I completely take your point. It's not ideal. We recognise there are quality issues regarding some of the decision-making that's taking place through our agency team. It's sort of been a bit of a matter of getting the numbers through the door and sort of bringing that overall workload down to bring the service back onto an operational level. We have retained, obviously, 1 further full-time equivalent through agency. And again, that's because the levels of demand outstrip what the service in its current form is capable of sustaining. What we would hope, if I'm honest with you, to see is the demand level drop, because trying to recruit a planner is you can't buy them for love nor money, and we have tried. In terms of the development manager, we've undertaken 2 exhaustive searches through both open recruitment and engaging with specialised recruitment consultants to try and help us find qualified candidates for the development manager role. We had undertook 2 interviews a couple of weeks ago. We were looking to progress one of them because only one of them was suitable, and she's subsequently withdrawn from the process. Obviously, sort of having gone back to her current authority, which is some distance away. So I think the problem is it's just the people who we're looking for just simply don't exist. There is a significant skills gap at that level, and fundamentally those who are qualified to do it can charge a significant amount in the private market doing consultancy work, and more than what a local authority can afford to offer in terms of its wage structure. So we continue to undertake a search. I will come back to Councillor Maynard on how that goes as we go forward.
Can I just come back? I mean, clearly, I think we need to acknowledge is it's not acceptable to obviously. I mean, I find it quite frankly embarrassing out in the parishes where we've had some very interesting. There's no other way to put it than cock-ups made by some of the agency staff, and I think that it is also a problem when you've got a head of development control on a pro rata basis. I believe I'm right in saying he's paid more than the chief executive. That worries me, and it should worry the public out there as well. Has there been any thought as to neighbouring authorities in terms of pooling the experience that is across East Sussex, across the respective authorities?
There has. We've had very, very initial conversations with neighbouring authorities, and I will say that we're not, at this stage looking to limit that just to East Sussex. We border a number of Kent authorities as well, so I'll be looking to engage with them throughout this process. At this stage, it's just conversations between colleagues of look, is this of any interest? What can we help? Where's the mutual benefit in this? So there's nothing proactively happening at this stage, but absolutely we're not taking that opportunity off the table. I think we've got to be really careful not to just buy more problems from other people where other authorities are also in crisis. I think if we're going to partner with somebody, it has to be mutually beneficial and and sort of work cooperatively rather than sort of us taking on anyone else's issues or them taking on ours. So I think it's a delicate matter, but I think absolutely it's worth exploring, and we are having very early stage conversations with all neighbouring authorities as to that.
Yeah, I will got to say, I don't envy your task there. Yeah, awkward knife edge, as you say. You could almost put a call out to anybody in university, if you, instead of going for media studies or something that's probably not really up to scratch, do a course in town planning, and you can name your price and go and work anywhere in the country, possibly anywhere in the world almost. So there it is. Councillor Thomas, you ready to come back?
To say, I don't, thank you, Chair. I don't want in any way to invalidate Councillor Maynard's point, but I would just like to say that one or two decisions have been made in connection with my ward that I feel I've been happy with, and I think maybe residents have been as well. And backing up the general point that Ben is making, it is very true that there is this massive national shortage of planning officers, and Hastings is having similar problems with recruiting at the moment. But at the same time, it's rather important to give credit where it's due. And if we look at the figures for processing major applications, to go down from 492 days in the second quarter to 240 in the third, a halving within one quarter, is a major achievement to which I think credit should be given.
Add, Chair, that it's not just it's in my ward as well, and if you want examples, I'll be happy to show you. And they actually take more time because they're going back. They're having to reapply, and the message was, can you come in and talk it over with us? Which you referred to earlier on. There is you're encouraging that sort of thing, and I can see why. But the decision should have been right in the first place.
Now, on my list, I have Councillor Cortell. At last.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I apologise for not being present in person. I am having a 4.5-week course of daily radiotherapy at the moment for cancer, and I'm 2.5 weeks through it. It's taking up a lot of time, and I cannot be publicly presentable all the time through a meeting. So apology if I'm remote today. I'll get to my points. First of all, I've got a couple of issues on housing and then one on recycling. Housing-wise, Councillor Mooney mentioned the number in temporary accommodation, and Ben Hook quite rightly said this is a reflection of need. I totally agree with that, and that is why at the January meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee we decided to remove the number of people in temporary accommodation on the basis that it wasn't a useful indicator, and we replaced it by the number of prevented homelessness cases for next year, 22-23, which I think will be a far better target. The next point I have is referring to Councillor Thomas's point about the rough sleepers, and Lorna Ford pointing out that in her expectations the funding is likely to end and cause us a major problem. I perceive that as well. And I would like to recommend to this committee, I can't move anything because I'm remote, that we resolve to lobby central government through the local government association to try and retain this funding for rough sleepers. It's been fantastic what's been achieved in terms of removing rough sleepers from the street and being able to house them, and it would be tragic if we go backwards and end this excellent scheme. and I very, very much hope that we will consider as a committee proposing to the Local Government Association that this funding should be retained. Moving on to recycling. Yes, I agree with you, Chair, that the 52% of recycling is most unlikely to be achieved. And I think there is one area which is unexplored. It's where there are blocks of flats where there is no recycling taking place at all. And I can say that mine is one of those blocks, and I'm quietly working behind the scenes on trying to get some recycling in my block of flats. In the case of my own block, it's a matter of some residents being a little bit difficult in terms of finding space for recycling, but there are other reasons in other blocks of flats. And I think that if we find ways of having recycling across flats in urban areas, I think we'll move a long way towards helping us to achieve the target. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I wish you well for the rest of your treatment, obviously, and I'm sure the committee do the same. Ben will have an answer for you.
Just on the waste part, Chair, I mean, obviously, this is something that Councillor Cortell has raised a number of times. I think the answer remains the same, that the cost of providing that service outstrips the benefit. We do strategically place areas for bring sites, obviously. And it's not just town centre sites and blocks of flats where it's problematic in terms of recycling collection. You get a lot of our rural areas, for example, where particularly in the AOMB, where houses are immediately adjacent to the road, where it's not possible or not proper that we have roadside collection for some houses, and therefore we do place bring sites, as close to those properties as possible to make sure that recycling facilities are available in the area, and that's, I think, about what we can offer within the limitations of our budgetary controls.
Would I be correct in my understanding that some bring sites are being shut down at the moment?
Not as of yet, but that will be a decision to be taken probably through either Cabinet or the Joint Waste Committee. So I think if there is discussions about that, that will obviously be made in the public forum as and when they happen. We do review bring sites, their effectiveness, and other such things, but I'm not sure that any decision has formally been made yet.
I think Councillor Cortell, you may be worth a word with Councillor Field. Is your portfolio on that waste? Or was it Councillor Project? Councillor Project, sorry. Ben, Councillor Project's here. and she's on the Joint Waste Committee and the portfolio holder, so that might be an option. I'm sure you'd like Ben and Councillor Project's here, Councillor Cortell. What have I got? Councillor Coleman, you wish to come back, and then I can take Councillor Langlands.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As Councillor Cortell is absent, sadly so, I'd like to propose the motion as Councillor Cortell spoke it, and I believe Councillor Cook is willing to second it. And I'd also like to add that this is an issue we're finding with a lot of funding pots, I think, from central government, in that they are short-term, one-off, often ring-fence funds, when what we need is long-term funding. And I think it would be worth this committee sending a message to central government that actually we would like, especially this fund, where it is so critical to continue, because you can't fix a crisis by putting some money in there and then taking it away again. And we need that money there desperately for our homelessness cases.
Yeah, Councillor Cook?
Yeah, happy to second that.
Okay, do we want to take a vote on it now? I suppose I would assume that somewhere behind somewhere in the country this is being pushed by MPs various. But I suppose if we just make it official, then we.
It would need to go to cabinet.
They don't need to go to cabinet. No, it goes to cabinet or full council. So it's a recommendation to cabinet. Well, we can make that as a recommendation because we'll be looking for something to resolve and send to them in a minute anyway. So if that's all right, I'll come back to that. We're making note. I'll come back to that when I've got Councillor Langland's wishes to speak. So Councillor Langland.
Thank you. Just one quick thing. Little Common brings site shut in May. So, and that was something obviously that's come as a bit of a shock to the local residents there, Ben. So that was shut quite recently. But the question I wanted to ask was, I did see, going back to planning, and I'm sorry it's coming in a sort of rather disjointed way, going back to planning, I did see there is an increase in appeals. I just wondered, do we know whether those appeals are coming about from our minor planning applications and therefore from our capital officers or not? It would be interesting to know whether they are actually linked, because obviously they are costing us an awful lot of money, which I can see being ongoing for some time. If we're also having quite a lot of appeals coming through, that could again be costing us more money. So that's a piece of information I would find quite useful if this report on page 14.6 is that there is an increased number of decisions, has seen an increased number of appeals.
There's no direct correlation between the increased number of appeals and the outsourced staff. Where there is a correlation is between the increased number of decisions being issued, clearing the backlog, and the increased number of appeals. So as we, you know, if you say 10% of all all rejections get appealed, then as you go through the process and clear the backlog, you've cleared 400 cases, you're going to have an extra 40 appeals, which is actually pretty much where we are. But of course, an appeal then takes further time out of the officer. So that's why it's in there, just to sort of highlight that actually there's a full process that you go through in terms of that planning process to work through. So first you have to get through the validation backlog. That backlog then falls onto the planning officers. The planning officers then do their statutory function, make a decision, and then the backlog falls onto the appeals because you'll get an increased number of appeals. Once all of that is flushed through, hopefully we'll be in a position where that service remains sustainable versus the incoming applications and the decisions that can be made in time. You know, that doesn't change the fact that that we've had an increased number of complaints regarding decisions being made by the capital staff, and we are addressing that in terms of trying to retain particular members of that team and then give them more intensive training on our policies and how they should be implemented locally. And that's what we're working with Capita on, is now that we've got some stability and we know that there's, given the length of time that our maternity cover requirement is in place, plus we're going to keep the extra one on beyond that to ensure that we can continue to bring down the backlog. We're trying to maintain a stable 3 that we can then sort of improve that quality of decision making. But yeah, I mean, we recognise that there have been some issues, but there's not a direct correlation with the number of appeals. That's just because we're issuing more decisions.
Yeah, so I suppose if your appeals are pro rata to your decisions, then that's fine. But if your decisions were made the same, if you say forever you've done 100 decisions a month and all of a sudden you go from 5 to 50, you've got an issue. Yeah. But if you're pro rata, then you'll simmer. Councillor O. Williams.
I can't help thinking that some of this is because there's so much delegation now, and that people who normally, in the past, quite often would have got their problems heard by the planning committee, felt they had somewhere else to go, and whereas now, if it's just delegated, what other action can they take other than try and appeal?
Right. I think we've had an hour on this one so far.
Just something, I can't stop this thing booming. It's something that really does bother me, and that is that if our capita staff are not based locally, is it likely that we will have more, non-site visits by staff? What happens? I mean, I find in sites, certainly one in Ticehurst, where I know no site visit took place by the officer, because that particular person, I think, was probably in Northern Ireland. How much of the capita team is now based locally?
They're all still remote. They do come over now to undertake site visits as part of that. I mean, they won't visit all of the sites, and what we're trying to do is manage the allocations that go towards them for applications that are less likely to require a site visit. So where you're more likely to require a site visit is something particularly rural, where you're going to have, a development is likely to have a significant impact on the landscape, the sensitivities of the AONB, that sort of thing. So the instruction passed now to the validation team is that we've got to try and manage the types of applications that go to the capita staff to limit the need for site visits for those, because actually we don't conduct site visits on every single application, because in many cases that site visit can be done digitally through Google Maps and Street View. Where it can't be, that's when it needs to be allocated to an officer, an appropriate officer who can physically stand in the field and go, this is where the house is going to go, can't have this because it's in the middle of nowhere, sort of thing. So we are, and you know what, when we introduced the contract, effectively what happened was all of the old cases that were no longer being handled were just pushed over and said, here you go, chaps, you deal with it. And that was probably a very ineffective way of managing that. And what we're doing now is looking at what applications are coming in and trying, where possible, not to allocate particularly sensitive sites to officers that aren't able to visit.
Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chairman. My Sydney one, we had Optivo, the housing association, which have now left us, and they've left us in the lurch, really, because all the jobs that they were doing for our area, it seems to be that the councillors, the parish councillors, are doing more than they are, and they bring people in from places of a weekend and not doing the jobs. So I'm getting people in, and so are the other people getting people in to do the jobs. Now, these people get a lot of money, and I don't think they're doing the good for the area. They're getting all the planning that they can get, and when they get the planning, they change it. And I just think we're being sold down the line a little bit here. And we've got to keep an eye on these people. They're running amok, and they're going to change their name again because they've mucked it up. So we've got to have some teeth on these people. We can't let them get away with it. And the builders are non-existent. We've got one builder left in Bexhill. So what's happening is affecting everyone. Thank you.
Right, now then, recommendation resolved that this committee consider these findings, I think we've done that, and recommend any actions to Cabinet as necessary. Councillor Coleman had an action that we write to government or propose a Cabinet write to government MP, whoever, to express a concern over the potential loss of the special funding for homeless people. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that was...
That's about it. I got the gist.
Yeah.
And that was seconded by Councillor Cook. So we're happy with that one. Any other actions as necessary, or just sort of get the answers to the questions that we bombarded Lorna and Ben with? Yeah. Sam?
only on Councillor Carroll's point, perhaps it's worth just a recommendation to Cabinet about ensuring that there are eyes on the fact that Optivo are having a merger at the moment, and just to maybe check on the housing association and the situation with how they're going to change the way they're managing properties in the area. Maybe that's worth just making Cabinet aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy with that? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Have you sort of got specific, suitable words then, Louise? Good. So we've got a mover of Councillor Commons, second of Councillor Cook. All those in favour of that? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. It's passed. Any objections? No. No. Okay. Right. Let's move on. Annual work programme, item 6. You'll remember we had the meeting a couple of weeks ago about the work programme. Looks like Councillor Gion's going to be here quite a bit, isn't he? Where did we come with this? Where did we had things we were bringing forward, didn't we? Number of.
Yeah, I've got 2 which are operationally required for July. First of which is the commercial case regarding the Town Hall Renaissance scheme. The second of which is a paper regarding our policy on affordable housing provision. Both of which I'm sure will generate much discussion.
Sure they will. Was we looking at the... Shall we mention the sort of impact of second homes in Rye, Winchelsea, Canberra? It says here specifically, but it's probably district-wide. Was we looking at that as well, somewhere?
There was a discussion about that, wasn't there? I don't know if that was something that we wanted to do specifically as a task and finish group. I think that's where that was heading, rather than necessarily having a direct sort of committee meeting about it.
Yeah, I think we are looking to firm up what task and finish groups or subcommittees will be having this year. As Ben said, there was quite a lot of focus at the meeting on the 17th of May on that particular topic around Airbnb, second homes, tourism strategy. That was certainly one. But really, it's really thinking about the items for consideration in Appendix A and whether they're part of the work programme for 22-23 or whether for some of these topics they warrant a task and finish group. What I would say is we need to keep the corporate plan in mind and the priorities of the council and make sure we're focused on those. Yes, it's really over to you to think about what topics you think warrant a task and finish group. What I would say is we're not here to debate the topic. We did do a little bit of that at the last meeting. So if we can focus on that. And the other point to make is that we now have the member briefing programme, which actually kicks off in a couple of weeks' time with the Town Hall project. So we also have that as an option. If something's an update item, then you may wish to consider putting it on that programme rather than having it as an item to overview and scrutiny committee. So that's another option that perhaps we didn't have before.
Would that... Let's sort of think a bit differently. Given what Lorna's just said about these member updates on different projects, if instead of us sort of trying to... We've got our work programme here, you know, the sort of bread and butter work, if you like, that we have to do. Now, if on the next meeting we add to that the Town Hall Renaissance and the affordable housing, do we want to just sort of leave the others and sort of, if we need to add to those future, say the next meeting, we can then look at the August meeting or September meeting, whatever day, September meeting, and decide on that. rather than try and do it now. Because if we're going to have these updates, then we may get the answers we seek from an update on a, you know, on an evening, or alternatively, it might give us the you know, we might get more questions than answers, if you like, and then we can say, well, we got the update, but we got this question, this question. Can we discuss it further somewhere else? So.
Sorry, Chair, if I can just interrupt. Apologies, but Appendix 1 does actually incorporate the discussion that we had on the 17th of May. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. So the items in Appendix 1 should reflect that already. So we've actually put a little bit of thought into that at the time, I think, which has saved us a bit of a job.
I'm looking at the wrong one.
Yeah, and I was looking at the wrong one too, but it's the one at the very, very back.
Page 24.
Yeah, on page
24. Right, here we go. That looks better.
That makes more sense.
That makes more sense. No one noticed it on YouTube at all. Right, so page 24, right at the back, you'll see Appendix 1 is the work programme. So next meeting in bold is the main item. So we've got Town Hall Renaissance project, built leisure facilities strategy first draft. So that might answer some Councillor Mooney's questions as well. Draft revenue budget and capital programme outturn. Then later on in the year, November, we got final built leisure facilities strategy. So are we happy with that? I think that looks better. I'm sure that was better. Yeah, page 24. Councillor Maynard.
Chairman, it's only to say, obviously, we need just to take a step back and acknowledge what Scrutiny should be doing. And in terms of those updates, we just need to be mindful that if there is an update for members, we need to also consider whether that should be in the public domain. So in other words, if it is something that genuinely is controversial, where you would expect the public to be fully informed, my view is that you would take that to an open committee rather than just have an update. You might wish, of course, or members may wish to do both, where you have obviously a member update, but on the explicit understanding that we still have the ability to discuss that matter at a subsequent meeting once we've had that update. Because I'm very clear that members of the public, especially if there are major capital schemes, will be expecting to see their councillors debate rather than just have the reassurance that the councillor knows what's going on. There is a distinct difference, but I think we can do both, and I think that the idea of the update is a good one, but I also think, and I think we would all be very clear, I would imagine, that if there are major capital projects that Scrutiny wants to have a look at, that we debate those and that we debate those in public.
No, thank you, Chairman. No, I just wanted to sort of comment on that, and that's perfectly valid. In fact, that's what we're going to do. So, with regards to specifically the biggest one on here is obviously the Town Hall Renaissance project. We're looking at significant capital spend. We're doing the member briefing that's going to happen on, I think it's the 14th of this month, isn't it? Is focused around the planning and the design aspects, and then that is the day before the public consultation on the planning happens. The July meeting for this committee will be focused on the commercial case behind it, i.e. the financial case. You know, does it stack up? Is it value for money? And I think that's the bit that is the focus of this committee and the right of this committee to interrogate that document. So.
Councillor Maitland.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask on the subject of the Town Hall Renaissance project? It is down here as July, we're discussing this. I have an idea that it's actually coming to planning in July. No doubt Ben can confirm or deny this, but if that's the case, is there enough time? Because I'm not sure I haven't checked the July planning date yet. But if it's, say, the week following, is there enough time to discuss this project before it comes to planning? Or what is the order of things? Perhaps you could confirm. Thank you.
Happy to do that. We're looking to submit the planning application in July. So what we're going to do is the process is next week we've got the member briefing on the design aspects of what's being brought forward. The following day we've got the stage 2 public consultation, which is where members of the public get the first view of what's being proposed. That consultation feedback is then fed back into the design work, and then the planning application will be submitted in July. What we've decided to do is, because the planning and the design aspect of this is very much the remit of the planning committee and the planning department to resolve, rather than necessarily this committee. So we're going to allow the planning process to run as a separate issue. The commercial and financial case behind it, i.e. how much is it going to cost, how much is it going to generate an income, what's it going to do in terms of our carbon footprint, is very much a policy issue and very much the remit of this committee. So we've decided to split the two, so we don't get into design questions in overview and scrutiny, because that's the remit of planning, and we don't get into commercial questions in the remit in planning, because that's the remit of overview and scrutiny. So this committee will then make a recommendation up to Cabinet. Cabinet will then make a recommendation up to full council in September. So that's the process in terms of the commercial strategy, i.e. the financials will come to scrutiny in July, then Cabinet and Council in September, whilst the planning application will run as a separate process, will go to the planning committee in October. So it'll all be, everything that's agreed will be subject to planning, and that way we don't have pressure put on the planning committee to make a decision based on commercial factors, and we don't have any design issues being considered as part of the commercial case, and both can be individually scrutinised properly and fully.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on that? And from the point of view, sorry, I've just lost it now. Can we go to Councillor Maynard and
I'll go to Councillor Coleman.
Cheers, Chair. I was just going to second what Councillor Maynard said earlier, and I think because there are these big issues like the town hall, like the leisure facilities, crime and disorder, arguably, I think it is important that we don't lose the transparency of these open meetings through these briefings. And I was wondering if perhaps, in the same way that planning, we have a call-in procedure, whether there could be a call-in procedure of some kind on those members' updates, so that there is a capacity for members to respond to those and say, this particular item, I think this deserves to go to an open public meeting, such as scrutiny or wherever appropriate.
Yeah. Did you have something to say, Councillor Maynard?
Briefly, just to ask how long the public consultation is going to run. I know it's not for this committee now, but just for a point of interest.
I think that the stage 2 planning consultation runs for 2 weeks, but then obviously further consultation will happen once the planning application is submitted. So you get 2 weeks of initial pre-application, if you like, consultation. The methodology just so that the committee are aware, the methodology we're focusing on is we're putting a general questionnaire out on our website through social media, and then we're directly physically mailing all those within the boundary remit of the town centre, because we recognise that it's both a specific planning issue regarding those who live in the vicinity of the building and operate businesses within the vicinity of this building, but also it's a wider Rother issue that requires that focus. So anybody and everybody in the district could and should be encouraged to respond to that consultation that launches next Wednesday. And it starts with a open public sort of display in the committee room here, which we're doing all afternoon, and we'll be publicising that through our social media channels.
Could also take 12 weeks to validate the plan application, but there you go. That would be embarrassing. Councillor Madeley, has your brain refunctioned?
Yes, my brain's woken up. I do apologise, Chair. You mentioned, Ben, the 14th of June. The first I've heard of that particular date for the benefit of a members' update or member discussion. So when are we likely to officially know? I haven't seen anything through.
I believe a Teams invitation has gone out because they are online. They're not face to face, so that you need to look out for a Teams one rather than the normal notification of the meeting.
And
but it has gone out.
Yeah. No, it's already out, and it's for Tuesday the 14th at 6 o'clock. Member briefing.
Just point out, there is actually a clash which will only affect myself and Councillor Drayson. Namely, the Member Learning Day, the 14th of July, is also the Town Council away day to decide its priorities for the next 5 years. Those two meetings clash. Just let you know.
I think if you went through the calendar, probably somewhere along the line, somebody in this room is going to clash with something.
It's unfortunate that two meetings which have a very similar purpose, namely to review, that they clash. And there are certain people like myself who would like to make an input into those two. And I think if those clashes can be avoided, I think it's particularly important for the Town Council and the District Council to work together to avoid significant clashes, actually. I don't think it's just the same as somebody else not being able to go because they're going to see the sister back there.
I think we'd have to be very careful, Councillor, about showing any preference to Bexhill Town Council's diary over the numerous other parish and town councils that exist in the district, many of which have meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday nights and Monday nights from time to time, and Thursdays.
I'm not suggesting a priority. I'm just suggesting it should be taken into account. And I think because it's a bit different, actually, because the Town Council is half the size of the entire district. And therefore, I think it is a significant partner. It should be taken into account. I'm sorry, I'm quite stubborn on that one.
Councillor Cook, you wish to speak?
Thank you. Yes, just to bring us back onto our annual scrutiny work programme discussion, I'd still like us to take very seriously the Healthy Living report and include that in regeneration, including our green spaces and looking at our neighbourhood plans and talking about all the different facilities we have for outdoor healthy living. I'd still like that to be discussed in full at some stage, scrutinised here by us. And the other thing that Councillor Maynard brought up on the 17th of May was about the deprivation of people living in mobile caravans and mobile homes on some of these holiday sites and what we can do to help and support them. I think that would be quite an interesting scrutiny discussion to have. Thank you.
Would the first one you said there, would that almost be better off as a task and finish group?
It probably would be, actually. Yes, that would be really good. I'm quite happy to propose that becomes a task and finish group, which I'm happy to be a member of.
How does that work?
Sorry, I'm struggling to see that on the current list, that particular topic. Is that one that we had for items for consideration, or is that a new topic?
On page 21, it's the second bullet point down, healthy living to incorporate leisure facilities inside and outside and the skate park.
For the purposes of those listening online, for the purposes between the leisure facility strategy that we bring forward, the play and pitch strategy that's being undertaken as part of the local plan development, I think that there's enough meat in that for a small task and finish group, probably 3 sessions with a report back to be held. I think that's quite a nice one, actually.
Thank you.
Right, so where are we? We don't need. We're happy with next month. Councillor Cook's happy. She's got a task and finish group. Ben even sounded happy to do all the paperwork for it. So that's all good. Apart from Councillor Thomas, he's not happy about the 14th of June, but there we are.
Most of them unhappy, but I do think it's really important because whenever people at the Town Council say things about the Rother District Council, I always stick up for Rother And I always, say that the two organisations should be working together. And so the more you work together, the better the response you'll be getting from the town council. That's my point. Okay.
So, there's probably not much else we can add to that, is there? For now? No? So, if that's the case, I'll declare the meeting closed. I don't think there's anyone else. No, I'll declare the meeting closed at 19:55. Just clicked up on there. Thank you very much for your attendance.